Nobody can have the exact same idea as you. Nobody can execute the idea exactly as you can. And nobody is going to have the same connections, network, resources that you have. So first off, you have to believe that you have the power to execute on this, that there is innate value in who you are as an individual that no one can recreate or duplicate.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
We've got a special release episode for you in between seasons here on First Case. We're going to be speaking today with Cara Lunsford, the VP of Community at Nurse.com. She's got a podcast. It's called Nurse Dot, and it's a weekly nursing podcast dedicated to providing nurses with validation, resources, and hope, one episode at a time. Every week, Cara sits down with a new guest speaker to share inspiring stories of resilience and empowerment, building a space where nurses can speak candidly, feel valued, and discover tools and insights to benefit their profession. Nurses are a community that play a critical role in frontline healthcare, and a community that Cara and the Nurse Dot podcast team strive to support. It's available wherever you get your podcast or on nurse.com/podcast. And everything that we just said about this podcast and Cara's approach to building community is going to come out in our discussion today, as well as talking a little bit about what it means to be an entrepreneur. And Melanie, you and I and Cara are definitely going to be able to relate to each other on that topic.
Yeah, we really can relate. We all have our own unique experience, but at the same time, we share that common thread of that entrepreneurial spirit. And so being able to talk about that, what that looks like, being a nurse, seeing a solution, and then bringing that to life as an entrepreneur. It's a really great conversation and things that we should be talking about as nurses.
All right, everybody, this is going to be a fun one. Stay with us. Coming up next, Cara Lunsford.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
We are speaking with Cara Lunsford, VP of Community at Nurse.com. And Cara, this is a special release for us in between seasons. And what I love about it is I love talking to entrepreneurs. And so I think we've titled this one From Bedside to Business Owners. So I know Melanie also joined you on your podcast. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And there is nothing that I love talking about more than entrepreneurship.
Well, why don't we talk about your background and, tell us about how everything evolved in your career and ultimately with Nurse.com. Why don't you just give us a little background?
Sure. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, because if I spell it all out for you in detail in great granularity, it will be a 3-hour podcast. So
like Gilligan's Island, a 3-hour tour.
It's going to be a 3-hour tour, and we're all going to be stuck on that island. Okay. So I've been a nurse for 16 years, started out my career in pediatric oncology, did about half of my career there. So almost 8 years. While I was there, I started to feel the strain of what it is to work in healthcare, what it is to be a nurse, especially with a tremendous amount of grief and trauma and all of that. Realizing that my coworkers were also experiencing a ton of burnout and probably moral injury and all of the above. And so started working with my colleagues to create the supportive care committee. And that was probably my first move outside of just classic patient care, bedside, where I started looking at my colleagues as the people I was trying to take care of, myself included. And that eventually evolved into, could this be bigger? Could I be taking care of nurses in a bigger way, a more macro approach to the holistic care of nurses? So I started looking at, because I went into another field of nursing. I was a director of nursing for a home health here in Los Angeles. And even just in terms of looking for nurses, sourcing nurses, realizing where's the watering hole for nurses that I used to literally ask, like, where are they congregating? and they were pretty dispersed. There was, Facebook groups, and there were meetup groups on Meetup. They were just very dispersed in different areas. So I started to think, how could I use technology to create a space or a safe space? And initially it had this feel of kind of a workforce management. How do we mobilize nurses in a way that works for them? How do we bring them into a community where they can connect? And then eventually it morphed and changed, and I pivoted just right before 2020, to be honest. I started realizing I just need to focus. Yeah, good timing, right? It was like,
change things.
Right? Exactly. Good time to like pivot, right? You're like, maybe I need to really laser focus on just bringing nurses together in a more professional networking, social networking type of environment. So made that pivot, and the name of my company was Holly Blue. And so we became the first really professional social networking site exclusively for nurses and nursing students. A couple of years after that, nurse.com came along and they were like, well, we like what you're doing, and we would really like to bring you into the nurse.com family and bring this piece of technology that you've been testing out, and we'd like to bring you over here, and we want you and your team to do what you're doing, but do it with nurse.com. And so in March of 2022, we were acquired by Relias. Relias is our large parent company. Nurse.com is part of our family of brands. So that's where I've been since 2022, March of 2022.
I wanted to ask you about the students piece, because I can see the obvious need for the community, for established nurses. But I really like that you talked about students, because I can tell you that as a nursing student, I saw a lot of people fall off. And a lot of it was, too, that they didn't realize the intimacy that's really involved with nursing. Like, idealistically, I think they were very excited about the prospects of, what it means to be doing something that's so altruistic and helping people. But then, I found that a lot of them, and I think it was something like 30%, we started clinicals junior year. I want to say something like 30% of my nursing class dropped out in that first semester of our junior year. And knowing the staffing issues that we're seeing today, and not enough students coming in to replace how many people are leaving the profession, either, and, you and I both included, having left for entrepreneurial desires, right? We're part of that demographic, even though we're not retirement age. Knowing that that's happening, I just feel like we do need to wrap up these students earlier to really help with that. And I'm not trying to lay any blame on the college education at all, but I think having some community with people that are actually doing the job versus just the other students who are also scared and fearful, and maybe, I feel like just them playing off of each other that way can be a detriment to staying into the profession that they might have been successful in, but just didn't see through to the end of their education.
Absolutely. I think that nursing school's always been difficult. It's always been like boot camp, right? People look at nursing school, like when they look back over their career as being a nurse, you will hear almost every single person say, "Oh boy, nursing school." Even when I went into nursing school 16 years ago, it was, do you have support at home? Are you trying to work another job? It was tough. And for good reason. I mean, you don't want it to be a walk in the park, right? Because you want the people who are there and are serious about it and are passionate about the work and are willing to put in the time and can also weather the stress of it. Because we know that moving into nursing is also not a walk in the park. And so therefore they kind of have to mirror each other in a way. So it was a natural thing for me to want to incorporate nursing students because I genuinely felt that we need to create more mentorship. We need to make sure that these senior nurses that are in the community are making themselves available to these students who are coming in.
And to that point, there's just less mentorship. Can we spin that into talking about what your experience was like when you were working still at the bedside? Like, do you feel like you had good mentorship? Do you feel like when you came into nursing that they kind of wrapped you up and really brought you along? Or did you feel like you were a little bit on your own out there?
So I had a pretty good experience as opposed to a lot of the nurses that I talked to. At Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, when I came in, they had a residency program, a pretty robust, versant residency program. You were able to pick an area that you really wanted to focus and work in, and you had a lot of preceptorship. You were not even working on your own for months before you were finally, kicked out of the nest. There was a lot of education classes that we would take. It felt like an extension of nursing school in a lot of ways, where we went over a lot of things. It was a bit of a cocooning. And I think at the time, the nurses that I worked with, many of them were fantastic mentors, really great preceptors. Of course, you always have, I don't think you're ever going to be in any situation where there's not the random bully, right?
We've had a lot of episodes on bullies, and I think that's kind of actually one of the reasons for that question, honestly, is, how that all gets role modeled is really critical, again, to just keeping nurses in the profession. And as you mentioned, just mentorship in general. There's just less mentors out there, as we've talked about, with people retiring. And there's always kind of like, this is the old guard and this is the new guard dynamic as well, which is another reason why I think, just having that online community so that not everybody is having the same experience is also what I'm getting at. So let me ask you, why did you wind up sort of leaving the bedside? What motivated you to start your own business?
I think a lot of what I was experiencing, I realized that the care that I wanted to provide as a nurse was actually to other nurses, which is kind of unique because we always think about ourselves when we're nurses, we think about caring for patients, taking care of patients. It was a real shift for me when I realized, well, the nurse community, the profession is pretty sick.
I agree.
Yeah, they're ailing.
Well, we kind of martyr ourselves, right? I mean, how many people talk about how, nurses put themselves last? And, that really does create this dynamic, right? Where we don't exercise self-care. And then we do find in many cases that there's just a ton of burnout.
Yeah. And I would say that the ratio that I was taking on 1 to 4 million is a big ratio.
That's a bigger patient care ratio than what we even see in nursing homes.
I was like, wait a minute. I was like, y'all are worried about your 1 to 5? No, I'm just kidding. How about my 1 to 4 million?
That's pretty hefty.
So it was a lofty goal to take on a very large group of people that I felt were suffering. But it was also something that felt like a calling for myself. I felt like this is what I'm here to do. This is my purpose. This is what fills me up. This is where I want to spend my time. It doesn't feel like work trying to help nurses to be able to do the work that they signed up to do and be able to do it sustainably and to do it in a way where they actually feel like they're thriving, not just surviving.
So then how are you going to change that? What was your goal or your desire to help them thrive, to help them be better?
Yeah, because you can't just all throw them in a room together. That I have.
Yeah.
If you've been to any kind of Facebook group of nurses, you realize that just throwing them in a room together does not equate to thriving.
No. Usually quite the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. They're trauma bonding. There's a lot of trauma bonding happening in those rooms, but not necessarily just do you put them all together and suddenly poof, they're all, it's a big kumbaya. No. It's definitely about creating an environment. So, for example, in the app today, in the nurse.com app, we have ambassadors. So we pay nurses. So we put money back in nurses' pockets, which was something that I was also really passionate about doing, making sure that nurses feel valued and that the work that they're doing for us, that they're compensated for that. So we have ambassadors, and their job is really to create an environment so that when nurses come into nurse.com, which was formerly Holly Blue, that they feel like this is an environment that is supportive. You don't see bullying. You see resources, tools, tips, mentorship, whether it's healthy eating habits, whether it's how you take breaks for yourself, self-love, self-care, all of these things, because you have to create the environment. Because when people walk into the environment, I think we naturally want to assimilate to that environment. It's kind of like if you walk into a party, you feel the vibe of that party, and then you assimilate to the vibe of that party. So our job is really to create the vibe. And that way, if there's an outlier or someone is behaving in a different way, it becomes very obvious. And then we have opportunity. we have an opportunity to talk to that person and engage with that person and find out more about what's going on in their life, and that other members and the ambassadors have an opportunity to do that. Because I think that that's what we really want to be able to do, is have a collective experience, but also to have a very individualized experience as well. So that's the start.
Yeah, well, I like that because, as we've already mentioned, Facebook groups and things like that, they can be vicious at times. Nurses are already known for eating their young anyway, but we can do it really good behind a keyboard and a computer screen, because there's even that other layer of, invulnerability. So having a controlled environment, I know you and I talked about our control on the podcast that I did, but being able to control that environment to really dictate, hey, we're going to have a positive experience here. We're going to provide resources, and we're going to ensure that everybody here is actually taking care of it. I like that. I like that there's that push to really make a positive place for nurses to be taken care of, because people don't think about taking care of the nurses too often.
And I want to say that we try not to control it. I know sometimes you'll go into a Facebook group and you feel like it's heavily moderated. You can't post, or you can't do this, or you can't. And somebody is saying, yes, this can go in, this cannot go in. And we really try not to do a whole lot of that. We have a lot of trust and faith that this community is really looking for this environment, and that we will take each opportunity as it pops up and address it in a way where we use a lot of emotional intelligence. I think we're really trying to harness emotional intelligence. I will say that that's something that Relias and Nurse.com that we practice even at a corporate level. We have a DEIB department, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging department within Relias. So a lot of what we do is learning about leadership, learning about emotional intelligence, learning about these things, and being able to help the community as a whole to embrace a lot of these values.
So what does that look like? Can you give an example of when you have to maybe use that emotional intelligence to, I'm not even sure, just what does that look like with this group?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, we might see a post that comes into the community, and maybe the post is just a link to a news article. Doesn't have really anything in it, but the link is provocative in some way, where maybe it's talking about strikes, or maybe it's talking about some sort of violence that happened. It's just a link. There's no context to it, no nothing. For example, I would reach out, or one of our ambassadors might reach out to this person and say, thank you so much for sharing these links, these news links. And it seems like this is something that you're really passionate about, that you're really passionate about violence in the workplace, or you're really passionate about the healthcare workforce environments and the strikes that are going on. We would love to know more about how you feel about these things. Can you give some context to these articles? How does it apply to you? What do you think? What do you feel about it? And maybe you even want to have a private group in the app or a public group in the app where you talk about things that are happening in society. And that way you open up the discussion. You don't just go to the person and say, hey, this doesn't really contribute to the community. This stuff seems really negative. It's out of context. And we prefer that you take it down.
I see that. Yeah.
That's not really helpful, because then the person maybe is just going to feel shut down. They're going to feel silenced in some way. They're not going to feel a sense of belonging.
Nope.
That's for sure.
Or that it's safe to post anything.
yeah, they're not going to have psychological safety. They're not going to feel a sense of inclusion or belonging. And immediately there's going to be maybe a feeling of shame or embarrassment or something like that. And then now you've lost this person probably forever. Instead of getting curious about what's happening in this person's life. And I think that the more we can teach the community, because imagine as we get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, right now we have tens of thousands of nurses that are on the platform, okay, that are joining every single day. We've got new nurses joining, sometimes 25, 50 nurses joining almost every day. So you want to make sure that you're creating an environment and that they start to understand. Because when I treat that one nurse that way, that nurse is then going to treat other nurses that way. And so it has this nice little ripple effect.
No, it can have a ripple effect for positive. It can have a ripple effect for negative, depending on how we treat other people. Hands down.
I think a big part, and I've had some training on emotional intelligence as well, with other organizations I've worked in. I think a big part of it is keeping the reactionary in check, right? So emotional intelligence is about having a pause, reflecting on maybe factors that are coming into play and just being aware of that before you just react to it. And I would say pour gas on the fire is maybe a great way. And I realize there's a whole lot more to it, but to just kind of add some context to it from my experience anyway, and Cara certainly, add some color or your own thoughts to that. But it's really that reactiveness that causes a lot of the stress and in our environments and everything. It's not necessarily well thought out, our responses. And that really is what causes a lot of escalation. And so to stay productive in conversation, we've really got to turn that reactionary part of our brain, that fight or flight that just wants to jump in and fight a lot of times. It's about trying to turn that off. And I can see where that de-escalation skill, Cara, about how you're not alienating the audience, but maybe you're saying, you're not even saying it to them, but maybe they originally put something provocative out there to elicit that kind of a response. And so you're not alienating them, but maybe challenging the fact that, maybe we should think about what it is that's really going on that's causing you to want to have this conversation. And we're not saying you can't have it. And, just trying to set a tone for what I would consider to be a healthy discourse, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's really about exactly what you said, which is reactive versus responsive. Right? These are just two very different types of things. Reactive is something that happens usually instantaneously without thinking, that there's very little rumbling around with the feeling. There's very little acknowledgement or awareness around what you're feeling. It is literally just a very fast, to what you said, a fight or flight response. And usually we have to backpedal on those types of reactions that we're having. Those are the moments when we find ourselves having to apologize. They don't oftentimes go well when we react versus take the time to thoughtfully respond. And so, I say on every podcast that I'm on, mine included, that I love Brene Brown, like love Brene Brown. Like she might be my favorite person aside from my wife and my child.
A little bit of celebrity crush. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm such a fangirl of Brene Brown. If I ever get her on my podcast, I'll be like, okay, I'm good. I can die happy.
I have achieved the top.
That's it. I've achieved the top. But I do love how she talks about, and I know that we're talking about entrepreneurship, but however, I will say that all of these things that we utilize are what make us successful entrepreneurs. Is getting really curious about our emotions and learning how to be responsive and not reactive, learning how to pivot. These are all tools that you use in stressful situations. If you're a nurse, you are in daily, hourly stressful situations. If you're deciding to move into entrepreneurship, you are also in daily, hourly stressful situations for different reasons. You might not be dealing with life or death scenarios, but sometimes you're dealing with a ton of money that you are responsible for now because you have investors or something like that, or you have a board that you are responsible to, and you have employees that you're responsible for their livelihood or something like that. So you have an enormous amount of stress. So learning how to harness these types of tools, many of which I've personally learned from people like Brene Brown, about getting curious about your emotions, being able to, with specificity and granularity, be able to identify those emotions more than happy, sad, and angry, but the 30 emotions that we're kind of supposed to be able to identify, and getting curious about them, and then peeling back the layers and the onion layers, if you will, and really starting to rumble around with that before we start to make choices and decisions and actions based off of those things. And when we are in everyday situations, we really don't have to make 6-second decisions. In nursing, yes, sometimes we do have to make like immediate decisions. And usually those are task oriented, right? Like those are usually things where we have to make decisions very quickly. However, there are times when you are in a situation, maybe it's with a colleague or maybe it's with a doctor or someone like that, where you have to make a very split second, almost emotional decision because maybe there's something that's happening. The patient there's something happening or they're declining. And now you are in a face-off with another person and you are having to figure out how to navigate that emotionally because you have somebody on the receiving end, which is your patient. So I think that this is like such a good tool and it's an important muscle to flex regularly because it's going to serve you no matter whether you are at the bedside or whether you're deciding that you want to move into another area of nursing, or if you want to move into entrepreneurship.
Well, I think that's actually a good lead-in to tying a bow on this conversation. But you've mentioned emotional intelligence and being able to be responsive, not reactive, and these things that serve us well as nurses. And they are things that serve us well as entrepreneurs, which in my mind says that every nurse has the ability and the innate skills to be able to be an entrepreneur if they decide to, or if they choose to, or they see a problem and they want to fix it. We've got those skills. We apply them in a clinical setting, but we can take those skills and put them in a business setting if we so choose. So what advice would you give to a nurse who's listening to this, who's like, yeah, I really want to go do that? What would you tell them?
So first off, what I would say is, everything you just said, absolutely, 100% agree with everything you just said. You already have the tools. You already have the ability, the innate ability to do what it takes to start a business, to be an entrepreneur. You have it, okay? So if you're listening to this, if you are in nursing and you're saving lives and you've already done the hardest of the things, okay? If you're already getting curious about your emotions and you're exploring emotional intelligence, that is only going to serve you if you choose to take a different journey, which is maybe entrepreneurship. So the only thing that I would say about taking that leap is don't be afraid to talk about your ideas. The biggest thing I see people do is they have an idea and they keep it so close to their chest. They don't want to tell anybody about it. They don't want to share it. They're afraid. They're afraid that someone is going to steal it. And so many great ideas never come to fruition because of fear that someone else will take your idea. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Nobody is you. Nobody can have the exact same idea as you. Nobody can execute the idea exactly as you can. And nobody is going to have the same connections, network, resources that you have. So first off, you have to believe that you have the power to execute on this, that there is innate value in who you are as an individual that no one can recreate or duplicate, and that you don't have to worry about things that have not happened yet. So really just step by step. What do they say? How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a
There's
time.
like two really amazing things you said in there that I can relate to, and definitely it's really about the vision part of it. Like people, to your point, are worried that somebody's going to steal your idea, and I'm sure that happens occasionally. But typically, if you have a really good idea, it requires the enthusiasm, the passion, and you have to want to see it through. And that's where a lot of times it fails is, that's not there when a project. So you'd be surprised how many people might want to help you realize that idea and see it come to fruition, but they know that it's your vision. And so if you talk about it, you're more likely to find people that can help you make it come true because you're not going to be able to do it on your own. I'd say a second thing that always occurs to me is you got to be willing to do it for free for a little while, which is a big blocker for a lot of people. Is like, well, my time is kind of money and there are other things I'd rather do with my time. And that's totally to be respected. But as an entrepreneur, it's going to take you a while to really build something that actually generates income. There was something else you said at the very end that I also think is really critical, but there's some really good nuggets in this conversation about what it is to truly be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's the thing is that, I think the last thing I had said was about, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Try not to worry.
About the things.
Yeah, don't worry about the future.
You got to be willing to go. So again, if it's your special vision, you have to be willing to initiate that vision when you're not even 80% ready to go with it yet, because it'll never get battle tested. And the other thing I've noticed is, and I've done this a few times, you try to prevent things from happening before to that point they've actually happened. And you wind up putting a lot of time and resources into something that never even winds up being the issue. And you're missing the boat. You have to put it into play to figure out what problems actually need to be solved instead of trying to anticipate them all. And that is a huge stumbling block, especially for nurses, because we plan for every contingency.
Oh, yeah.
So you're literally going against who you are in your soft skills as a person. And really, it's hard to keep in check.
Yeah, we're always trying to anticipate and prevent, right? Things from happening. And yes, that can absolutely be your biggest enemy, which is just yourself getting out of your own way. And it really just boils down to being in the moment and being present. I used to talk to everybody about my idea. Uber drivers, people on the plane sitting next to me, some rando person. And I will tell you that the most amazing and miraculous things happened because of conversations that I could never have planned for, that I did not even, sometimes you look at your network and you're like, oh, this person's going to be able to help me and that person's going to be able to help me and this person's connected with this person, so they'll be able to help me. This person's going to be able to give me funding. This person's going to be able to connect me with hospitals. I would say 90% of the people that I thought were going to help me on my journey were not the people that ended up helping me on my journey. Like 90%. It was the random people that I would literally meet on an airplane that were like, hey, that's a great idea. I have something.
That.
No,
Yeah,
you can't
manufacture that idea. Yeah.
No.
I mean, that
and
conversation.
Nope. You can't factor it in. You can't anticipate it. You can't plan for it. The only thing you're doing is being authentic, real, transparent. You're connecting. I will say connect. If you are, I've watched people who have these phenomenal ideas, phenomenal, major introverts, don't want to talk to anybody just in life, not even about their thing, but they don't want to talk to anybody ever. And so either if that's the case, then you have to partner with somebody who's a talker.
Yeah.
You got to find that team.
Yep.
You got to find your
know
team.
your strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to be able to complement it for sure. Cara, any final thoughts on this? Like, a part of me feels like we're just getting started.
I know, we can talk.
We're kind of at time too. And so, but what are we missing about entrepreneurship? And I'll even throw it out a little bit broader. I know we talked a lot about emotional intelligence, and I think that's a key ingredient to building community. But maybe you even want to just talk about being a positive part of community. So, either of those concepts, anything you want to add, or like something that you feel like we missed in the discussion?
Well, I will say that this was part of my master plan to become part of this team, so that you have to bring me on as a co-host. So that is my master plan, just so you know.
Well, we know you have the entrepreneurial spirit.
I was totally inching my way into the team. Like, they won't notice that I'm here if I just keep showing up.
Yeah.
They'll be like, that's weird. Cara's still on this call.
Still here. We're still doing this. This is great.
She was a guest, and now she's just kind of made herself at home. So I mean, I don't know that I can necessarily point to anything that we missed glaringly from just that movement into entrepreneurship, from bedside to entrepreneurship, aside from just that willingness to be brave. I mean, I think there's just a bravery aspect to it. There's a belief in yourself. Sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I could never see myself as a Mark Zuckerberg, or that's not me.
That's the first fundamental flaw.
Yeah, that they don't see themselves as big. We make ourselves small a lot.
Yeah.
And first and foremost, being able to see yourself as a powerhouse, as someone who's big and able to do big things, that you are not different than the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, or the Elon Musk, or whoever these big change makers are. You're not different. You have that ability. And so I think that would be kind of my one final thing about the magic.
Don't limit yourself.
Don't limit yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are our own limiting factor in many cases. And the only thing that should limit you is your lack of desire to spend your time that way. If you don't want to spend your time that way, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's something that you think you want, then, don't think you don't have it. Because a lot of what it is to be an entrepreneur is just sticking with it.
Grit. It's a lot of grit.
It's a lot of grit. Yep. 100%. Yeah.
And we know nurses got grit. We know they have grit. We know nurses have grit, okay? There's no lack of grit.
Yes.
Grit and spades, for sure. All right, Cara, great job. And I do want to point everybody over to your podcast as well, because Melanie was a guest. I have not heard the podcast yet, but I'm very confident. Melanie, you did a great job. And Cara, you did a great job today as well. Really appreciate you coming on to share your entrepreneurial story, but also I don't think we've talked about emotional intelligence before. And, I enjoyed bringing that to the table as well, because to your point, that'll serve you in every walk of life, professionally and personally.
Yep, absolutely. Well, yeah, definitely come take a listen to the Nurse Dot podcast. Melanie and I had a great episode, which we'll be launching soon. And yeah, it's Nurse Dot. It's nurse and then DOT, all one word. And you can't miss it because it has my face on it. So
Excellent.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Cara.
Thank you, Cara.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
That was Cara Lunsford, VP of Community at Nurse.com, and also the host of Nurse Dot, a weekly podcast dedicated to providing nurses with validation, resources, and hope, one episode at a time. And Melanie, I thought there was a lot of good takeaways in here. And I loved the conversation around emotional intelligence. It's something that I've been aware of for quite a while, and even had a couple of companies that I've worked for train us on emotional intelligence, and also what it takes to be an entrepreneur and that grit.
Absolutely. It definitely takes grit, but I think there's value in seeing that the relationship between emotional intelligence and how we interact clinically with our patients, how we interact in business, and how it really drives a lot of our interactions and can affect them for the good or for the bad. And so it's really interesting to see that connection between the entrepreneurial spirit and your emotional intelligence. And I think Cara did a really good job bringing that out and really talking about that connection.
All right. Well, Cara, great job. Looking forward to more future collaborations between our podcasts. And as I mentioned, Melanie was a guest on the Nurse Dot podcast. So make sure you check that out as well. You can find it at nurse.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.